In this video, we'll show you how to replace the lower ball joint on your Ford F-150. This is located in the front of the vehicle and part of your steering and suspension system. Let's get started. Go ahead and remove our hub cover. And we can remove the lug nuts with a 21 millimeter. If your wheel is stuck on the hub, we can put one of the lug nuts on partially. And then we'll use a hammer on the back side. I'll be using a dead blow, that way I don't damage the rim. We can go ahead and remove this 8 millimeter holding the ABS wire in. And we can remove the 10 millimeter holding the brake hose to the knuckle. We'll go ahead and pop the ABS wire off of the hose and just pull that right out of its clip. Heading up the ABS wire here, we have a couple of small clips. I'm just going to use a pry tool to remove those. You can certainly use a flathead screwdriver for this. Pry out on that. Following the ABS wire up, we find the connector up on the back side of our fender well. We have a small red tab up top. We'll just pull up on the red tab. Just push in on the tab on the top after you've pushed up on the red tab. You can undo the connector. Make sure you check the terminals for any damage or corrosion. With the connector undone, we can go ahead and feed the wire down and just rest it on the knuckle. We can go ahead and remove both of the caliper bracket bolts using a 21 millimeter. I'm just going to thread that back in a little bit while I undo the other one. With the bolts out, we can go ahead and pull the caliper off of the rotor. And you're going to want to use something like a caliper hanger. You can certainly use a bungee cord for this as well. We can set the rotor off to the side. Now we need to remove the dust cap covering the axle nut. To do that, you can use a flathead screwdriver or a small pry bar. Just give it some taps while prying out on it. We can remove the axle nut with a 13 millimeter. You want to make sure that the axle is freed up in the hub. If not, you can use a small punch right in the center and a hammer. Now we can go ahead and remove the bolts holding the hub into the knuckle with an 18 millimeter. We can do the same on all four. Before I remove the last bolt, I'm just going to thread this one in just a little bit. That way the hub doesn't fall out if it is loose. In some cases, the wheel bearing will pull right out. You can pull the ABS wire around the backing plate Get that onto the front side of the backing plate. And I'm just going to tap lightly on the hub to get it to release from the knuckle. Once you have your hub freed up, go ahead and remove that bolt holding it in. And we can remove the hub. Now we can remove the 3 8mm bolts holding the backing plate to the knuckle. We need to remove the tie rod. We can go ahead and remove the pin first. Just fold back the ears on either side. I like to use a set of side cutters for this, but you can certainly use a flathead screwdriver or a normal set of pliers. If you had to damage your pin a little too much when you removed it, you may need to replace it. We can remove the nut with a 21mm. To free the tie rod up from the knuckle, we'll go ahead and strike the end of the knuckle with a hammer. You want to be careful not to damage the tie rod or anything in this area when you do this. We can remove the nut for the lower ball joint with a 24mm. I'm just going to thread that back on a little bit. We can remove the nut for our upper ball joint with a 21mm. I'll just thread that back on a few turns. Now we're going to use a hammer and strike the knuckle right here to get the knuckle to drop off the ball joint. Now we're going to strike the bottom of the knuckle to get the lower ball joint to release. Now we go ahead and remove the ball joint nut. We can remove the upper ball joint nut. Now you can simply pull the vacuum lines for the hub off the back side. And we can remove the knuckle. We have a C-clip on top of the ball joint here, holding the ball joint into the control arm. We need to remove this. To do this, you can certainly use a set of C-clip pliers. If you don't have a set of C-clip pliers, you can use a hammer and a flathead screwdriver. Using 2 flathead screwdrivers or even a set of pliers can help with this as well. Now we'll be using a ball joint press to press this out. If you need to, you can certainly use an air hammer or just a regular hammer to push this out. Before installing our ball joint, we want to go ahead and clean up the area where it's going to mount into. I'm just going to use a little bit of brake cleaner and a brush for this. We'll go ahead and apply a little bit of anti-seize just to the bore where the ball joint will go. I've applied some anti-seize to the ball joint itself as well. We can start installing this. If it doesn't want to move all the way up into the control arm, you can use a dead blow hammer or some type of soft hammer that won't damage the ball joint. We can go ahead and install our new C-clip. If your C-clip isn't fully set down, you can use a hammer and a flathead to just bop it in. We can go ahead and remove the nut from the ball joint. We can go ahead and line the knuckle up with the axle. As you do that, you want to line up the lower ball joint as well. We'll get the upper ball joint nut started on. We'll go ahead and snug that down. We can go ahead and snug our upper ball joint nut down. It's good to put a little bit of pressure on the ball joint just to hold it still. We can go ahead and get our tie rod installed. We'll go ahead and snug down the tie rod. It's good to put a little downward pressure on this while you tighten it down. We can go ahead and torque the tie rod nut to 85 foot-pounds. We can torque our lower ball joint to 111 foot-pounds. We'll torque our upper ball joint to 85 foot-pounds. You're going to make sure that your CV axle and the splines and the hub actuator are lined up. We'll install the cotter pin in the lower ball joint here. Fold back each of the ears around the nut. Do the same with the tie rod. I'm just going to apply a little bit of anti-seize to the mating surface, as well as the ears here. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off the axle shaft. I'll apply just a little bit of anti-seize to the shaft itself. Try not to get any on the threads. When installing the hub, you want to make sure that your ABS sensor is facing up. As you install the hub, you want to line up the axle. You can twist it back and forth, get the splines to engage. Once you have the hub in, you want to go ahead and start lining up your ABS wire. Place that like that. Go ahead and get our bolts in from the back side of the hub into the knuckle. we can go ahead and snug these down. We can go ahead and torque our hub bolts to 129 foot-pounds. We'll do the same on all four. Go ahead and install our backing plate. Line up all three of the bolt holes and install the hardware. And we can snug those down. Install the axle nut. We can snug that down. Now we can torque that to 30 foot-pounds. In order to keep the hub from rotating, I'm just going to go ahead and you can use a pry bar or an awl or a punch, anything to keep it from moving. Apply a small amount of anti-seize to the hub-centric ring. Try to avoid getting it on any of the studs. Go ahead and install your rotor. To hold the rotor up to the hub while you install the rest of your brakes, I like to use an old axle nut and one of the lug nuts. You can use a set of washers or anything to space this out to make it a little quicker. We'll go ahead and remove the caliper from the hanger. You want to make sure you remove the hanger from the vehicle. Make sure that your brake pads are spread all the way out in the caliper. We can go ahead and slip the caliper back over the rotor. We can install our caliper bracket bolts. Snug down the bolts. And we'll torque these to 184 foot-pounds. We'll reconnect the vacuum lines to our four-wheel drive hub. Make sure those are set all the way down on the hub. We'll get our brake hose lined up. The bracket on the knuckle, we can install the hardware for that. Snug that down. We'll get the ABS wire attached to the knuckle as well. We can slip the grommet for the ABS wire into the clip on the brake hose. And we can feed the ABS wire up into the engine bay. Push in each of the plastic clips. There's one on the upper brake hose bracket. The next one is up on the frame itself. following the ABS wire up into the engine bay, and go ahead and plug in our connector. You want to make sure that the connector is fully seated down, and press down on the red tab to lock it in. Before we can install our wheel, we need to do two things. Install our axle nut cap. You can use a small dead blow hammer for this. You don't want to damage anything in this area. Then you want to make sure that you remove the lug nut that you used to hold the rotor on. We can go ahead and install our wheel. We'll go ahead and snug those down in a crisscross pattern with a 21 millimeter. We'll torque these to 150 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. We can reinstall our hub cover.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.